Welcome everyone to another observability clinic. Today's topic is a practical guide to building Python-based extensions with Dynatrace. We've been covering the extension 2.0 framework quite intensively in the last couple of weeks and months. And now today we are at Python, and I couldn't find a better guest here or presenter than David Lopes. How are you?
Thank you, Andy. I'm doing good. How are you?
Very good. David, can you just give me or the audience a quick overview of what you do as an extension architect?
Sure. So I'm an extension architect for Dynatrace since about 2019. On my team, I usually help my team create Python extensions and also customers. So anytime we have a new technology that Dynatrace doesn't support out of the box, my team gets involved. And these days, I'm more on the background, like supporting my team, creating the SDKs, the tools that we need to be successful in developing Python extensions. And yeah, it's been working great, and we've created many Python extensions so far.
Cool. And today, I guess you're showing us how everybody can leverage Python to build their own extensions. So, David, what have you prepared for us? Let's kick it off.
Awesome. Yeah, we're very excited to share this with everyone finally, because our team has been using this internally for some time now. So today, we're going to learn about Python extensions, like Andy said, in the Framework 2.0, how you create a new Python extension, right? Like, what do you need to have in your machine, and what's the process of creating these extensions? And we're also going to talk about how you migrate extensions, right? Because you might have V1 Python extensions, you want to convert them to the V2 version, and why you would want to do that. So that's what we're going to talk about today.
Awesome.
So yeah, before we start talking about Python specifically, I just wanted to give a quick overview of the extension framework, just so that we have a little bit of background to understand why we did this migration, or why do we have this new framework. So the extension framework for Dynatrace is basically a set of APIs and tools that Dynatrace provides customers and partners and Dynatracers of extending Dynatrace. And when we're talking about extending Dynatrace, we're talking about sending metrics, events, logs. Right? We can also talk about extending with spans and even user sessions as well. These are all ways that Dynatrace provides users, capabilities of extending the tool. Because of course, Dynatrace supports many technologies out of the box, but there's always going to be new technologies that appear in the market, and Dynatrace needs to give their customers ways of extending the platform. So the extension framework is comprised of ActiveGate and OneAgent components, right? So we internally call this the remote for the ActiveGate and the local for the OneAgents. And Dynatrace provides both these components and the SDKs. The SDKs meaning the Python libraries or any sort of code that we give you to support you in creating Python extensions. So the extension framework 1.0, the one that we had prior to 2.0, it worked great, but it did have some limitations that we feel we've overcome with the extension framework 2.0. So if you're familiar with that, there was the plugin module, right? This was a component that came with the OneAgent and the ActiveGate, and that was responsible for running Python extensions in those machines. It only supported Python and JMX. So you could write Python extensions or JMX, Java Management Interface extensions. And there's also an observability clinic about these JMX extensions in 2.0. Those were the only two options we had with the previous extension framework. Dynatrace provided a tool called the Plugin SDK, which was a Python library and a Python CLI, which you would use to develop these extensions. But there were some limitations to the framework. If you ever try to develop extensions or even just deploy them, you'll probably face some of these. The main one is the distribution. So before, when you created a zip file for an extension, right, you build your extension, you created the artifact, which is the zip file. You wanted to run this on Dynatrace, you would have to manually deploy this artifact to the ActiveGates and the OneAgents. So that was not ideal because that could cause some problems. So human error or permissions change, or people extract the extension to the wrong folder, right? Especially around when you had like many OneAgents, And so you have 1,001 agents that you want to run extensions on, you would then need to deploy your zip file in those 1,000 agents. Not great. Scale as well, so you could only run the extension from a single active gate. I have some limitations on screens and the user parameters that you could ask the user. The UI was not very, you cannot customize that too much. And for developers, specifically the runtime. So these extensions, they ran in a single Python environment. So this Python environment was shared among all the extensions. If you're a Python developer, you probably know this already, that if you have multiple projects in the same Python runtime, they share the dependencies, and then there can be clashes with naming, and you have like one library, one version, another one in a different version. So that can cause some issues that are hard to troubleshoot. So, those are some of there were others, like the number of dimensions a metric can have and things like that were smaller, but these were the main ones that we needed to solve in the new framework. So then we introduced the Extension Framework 2.0, okay? At first, we've introduced the declarative extensions, right? Extensions where you don't need to write code for. This you just declare, you tell Dynatrace what you want to monitor, and then Dynatrace has the code to go and monitor those things. Okay, this is quite powerful. We did not have this before, where if you wanted to have like a SQL extension, so you want to run SQL queries before, you would have to write Python code that connects to the database and then run the queries. And now with the declarative extensions, you can just tell Dynatrace, hey, these are the queries. Dynatrace figures out how to run the queries, right? Same thing for WMI, SNMP traps. Dynatrace now also is providing the coded extensions in Python, because sometimes you need logic. Sometimes you need to do ifs and for loops, right? Sometimes you need to make multiple API requests. And this comes with automatic distribution of the extensions. So you no longer have to manually deploy the zip files, which is a big plus. And it's much more powerful how you can customize the UI for your extension and the configuration as well. All right, so I just put a table here just so we can have an idea of what changed from EF1 to EF2 and why we should care about EF2. And it's objectively better than the EF1 version of the framework, especially around the data sources that we have so many now. And for most use cases that we have, we don't need to use Python now, because we support so many different data sources that we call them this SQL, WMI, SNMP, and Dynatrace can even in the future introduce more data sources, right? This is a very modular system that we have now, which is kind of cool.
And David, just to wrap it up or sum it up from my side, I think the key things here, as you highlighted, are that we give our users an opportunity to bring in external data that we may not automatically capture. Typically, this is data from data sources that are either specific hardware, specific software, specific systems that either already provide data through the standard data sources like SQL, WMI, SNMP, Prometheus, or now with the coded extensions, you can also just write Python scripts to actually do a little bit more logic. And the nice thing is that we do it now in a safer way, in a scalable way, and allowing you as a user not only to show simple screens, but you can completely leverage our unified analysis screens, which, by the way, we also have a dedicated session, observability clinic on that as well. So a lot of great things, folks. By the way, if we are referencing other clinics, other videos, just look at the description of this video, and we'll try to add as many links as possible to the description here so you can find your way around. But thanks, David. Back to you.
Yeah, and you're absolutely right. And it feels really good when you're developing these extensions, because everything feels like it's part of Dynatrace. Everything fits very well because of the unified analysis screens, because of the automatic deployment. For the end user, it almost doesn't feel like they are using an extension. It's just almost part of the Dynatrace tool, which is really, really cool. Okay, now let's switch to actual Python extensions only. So for Python extensions, we provide a new SDK, which we call the DT SDK or the DT Extensions SDK. This is a Python library provides both a CLI, a command line interface, and an SDK. This thing is also integrated into the VS Code add-on. So there's also observability clinic about that. This is an add-on that's maintained by my team, where it really helps you be more productive in developing extensions. And it has support now for Python extensions as well. And this is an open source SDK. So you can even like open issues and see the code of how we're doing things. And it's available on PyPI. This available on PyPI is kind of important because previously, when you wanted to install the plugin SDK, you would have to download a file from Dynatrace from your environment. Now you just do pip install, and you get the SDK. It's much easier to get started with. This SDK provides several commands to create extensions, run extensions, build, upload extensions to Dynatrace, as expected. But we strongly recommend you use the VS Code add-on, because then it automatically does these commands for you and gives you a nice user interface to handle this thing. Here, I just wanted to showcase some differences between EF1, the EF1 meaning the framework 1.0, and EF2 for Python extensions. So there's a little bit of a different structure for the files. Now in EF2, extensions are a standalone Python module, okay? And this makes things much easier because we can treat the extension as its own thing. It doesn't depend on Dynatrace. It can run it on its own. And it also has its own dependencies. It's a single Python module that can run anywhere. And we did have to break up some files. So specifically, the properties that the user inputs go to its own activation file. The topology now is declared. So what does that mean? So before in EF1, if you ever developed extensions, you know that you had to create groups and custom devices. And you were limited to only custom devices. Now in EF2, you can create new entities in Dynatrace and create the relationships between them, which is quite powerful for the metric correlations that Dynatrace can do. The properties that you ask the user for, so if your extension needs to ask for a username, a password, any input from the user, leverages settings 2.0 in Dynatrace, which is quite powerful as well. So this is an example of an extension in the V1 framework versus the V2. Just wanted to showcase that, we had some limited things we could do with this. So we had to present the user with all the fields all the time. We didn't have like a changeable UI experience. So if the user selected a different authentication method, for instance, we couldn't change the other fields to hide the invalid parameters or have lists of things, right? And tabs and groups. There's a lot of things we can have now, and makes the experience of configuring an extension much nicer. And you have, as a developer, you can create these screens now, which is really, really interesting.
I think also, as you said, to reiterate, this feels more like, even you're building an extension, it feels more like it's more part of the Dynatrace platform. It feels naturally like it is part of the platform, yeah.
Yeah, and even for security purposes, like you can do input validation here that we couldn't do before. So, if you're asking the user to input a URL, you can make sure that it is a URL even before it gets to your extension, right? And things like that. Okay, so to create a Python extensions, there are 3 requirements. So you need Python 3.10 or greater. Okay, Python now it's in version 3.12, so 3.10 is going to be supported for quite some time, and that's the one we chose to start with. We recommend the VS Code Dynatrace Extensions add-on. This is on the VS Code marketplace, so you can just search for Dynatrace and you're going to find the Dynatrace Extensions add-on. And the DT Extensions SDK library. So this is the thing you install with pip install, right? The Python package manager, pip install DT Extensions SDK. With those 3 things, your experience should be fairly, good on creating Python extensions.
And also, folks, remember, there's going to be a link in the description, because we have a clinic that was covering the Visual Studio Code extension, also with all the different capabilities. So if you want to dig deeper into that, also check out that video.
Awesome. Cool. So let me show you how you would go about creating a new Python extension, okay? I'll be using the VS Code add-on as we recommend, but remember, you can also use the CLI. If for some reason you don't like VS Code or you prefer to use some other editor, all the VS Code is doing is running CLI commands underneath, and I'm going to talk about them as we do them. All right, so to create a new Python extension, first we open an empty folder in VS Code. So I'm going to just open my first extension. Okay. Now keep in mind that I already have the VS Code extension installed here. Okay. If I go to extensions and I search for Dynatrace. Okay. I'm not going to go over how to install and configure this. We have the observability clinic about that, but this is installed in my VS Code environment. All right. And then I have my Dynatrace environment connected to that via this extension. It's really easy to do. You create a token and you get started really quickly. All right, so I have this empty folder here. How do I create an extension? Well, you open the command palette in VS Code. You can do that by pressing F1 or Control-Shift-P as palette. So if you search for Dynatrace, you're going to have a bunch of Dynatrace extensions commands. And one of them is called initialize workspace, this one here. So this initialize a new extension workspace. Okay, it asks you to choose a Dynatrace version that you want to target your extension against. Okay, of course, Dynatrace, as it releases new versions, it might provide new things that you can add to the extension YAML, new features. So we usually target about a couple versions back, but not too back. So that we can kind of have access to these new cool features that Dynatrace releases. So I'm going to pick 1 to 75, and this is loading them directly from my Dynatrace environment. I already have the schema for that, so I don't have to download again. This will also create certificates for you to sign your extension with. And this is a kind of a new thing that we have that's very important, because this is how we guarantee that this is a secure extension, that your ActiveGate and the one agent, they can trust that extension because you signed this extension with a certificate, and then the root CA that provided that certificate needs to be on the ActiveGate on the one agent so that they know, hey, this person did create this code and I'm allowed to run this code. That's how we solved the distribution process. And then we get an ask here, like, do you want to create a standard extension 2.0, which are those declarative extensions, a Python extension, JMX conversion, or use an existing extension? We want to create a Python extension. So let's choose Python. It's going to ask you, okay, what's the name of your extension? And this is a Python module name. Okay, so it's going to be all lowercase with underscores. I'm going to call it my first extension. And that's it. Remember, I already have the DT Extensions SDK installed with pip install DT Extension SDK. If I did not have that, I would just do pip install DT Extensions SDK CLI like this.
Okay, David, just one quick favor to ask. Can you zoom in one notch here on Visual Studio Code just to perfect? Because I know some people may watch this on a smaller screen. Thank you.
Yes. So yeah, you install it like this. I already have it installed, but just in case, hit install. Okay, so this created a bunch of files for us here. Let's go over them quickly. So this is a standalone Python module. So we chose to use the setup.py file. If you've ever used Python before, you're probably familiar with this file. This is where it has some metadata about your extension, like what dependencies it has. By default, it is only going to have a dependency on the DT Extensions SDK. It creates this my first extension folder. This is where your Python code is going to go. And it also creates the extension.yaml and the activation schema.json. This is already an improvement from before. From before, when you wanted to create a new Python extension, you would have to have an existing extension and copy the files from that extension, right? You would copy the plugin.json, would copy the Python file, and then modify those files. Here we have this thing that already creates a basic extension for you, and you can get started really quickly. If you did not want to use VS Code, you would just run the SDK create. And that's the same thing. It's going to create the folders and the files for you. Okay. And the SDK also has a very good help system. So any commands, you can do a -- help, and it's going to give you, what commands you can run and how you use those commands. So we try to be good with the documentation there as well. Okay, so this is a working extension. If I go to the extension.yaml file, let me just reload my window. Okay, so if I go to the extension.yaml file, I can see that I have this Python session. That's the only thing I need for a Python extension in the YAML file. And it says, what's the name of the module? Okay. The activation, remote or local. This is also something that for people that have developed extensions before, you might notice it's kind of interesting because this remote means running from an active gate, local running from the one agent. So your code can actually do both with a single code, where before you would need to write two different extensions, one for the activate, one for the one agent. Now you can have a single extension that runs on both. And there's even this thing here. This is part of the VS Code extension, this simulate extension button. If I click this, it's going to run the extension. And this is a working extension. So I can click this and it's going to start running the extension and inputting things to the log here. Okay, so it's running the query method. It's actually running the extension in the development mode, right? Not communicating with Dynatrace, but just printing things to my screen right here.
That's super helpful. I mean, that's, I think, just solves or reduces a lot of the kind of deploy, debugging cycles, right? As a developer, you want to immediately try things out. And with this, just click a button and then your extension runs and you see all the output. That's really handy. Yeah.
It is really, really handy. And, you always have the option of do the SDK run manually as well. But this integration with the VS Code is cool because, first of all, it's going to save the executions for you. You can get the logs from the simulator here as a file. So it does some nice things that really help the developer be more productive.
Yeah, cool.
Okay, so yeah, just talking really quickly about the code here, the code that it generates, the only difference really from the V1 extension is that now, instead of being in an arbitrary Python file, it's always going to be in the main.py file because this is a Python module and things always start in a module in the main.py file. But if you look at the code, it's very similar to the V1 version. You still have a class here that extends a certain class, in this case, extension. We also provide you the query method. So it's a special method that runs every minute. This is an optional method now. You're not mandatory to use, mandated to use this method. And you have the initialize. So remember, we as the extensions team, we created like 300 Python V1 extensions and we needed to migrate the extension. So we kept that in mind. How do we make this as easy as possible, right? So I want to have this thing in a new framework. How do I make it as easy as possible to migrate? So they really look like a lot in the code to make that step easier. So this basic extension gives you an example of how to log, how to get configuration from the user, right? How to report a metric, and this fast check, which is a new thing as well, testing, hey, can this activate to run this extension? The extension comes with the settings 2.0 schema of how do I ask the user for parameters? Everything goes here. By default, it's going to ask the user for a URL, username, and password. Just as examples, right? You would modify this, of course, for your extension. And later, I'm going to show how can we generate this file automatically from existing V1 extensions. All right, so this is a working extension. Of course, it's only sending a simple metric. There's no real integration with some system, right? It's just reporting this my metric. But we can build it. So to build the extension, you have two options. You can use the command line, the SDK build, but in VS Code, that's going to make it much nicer. So we have Dynatrace extensions build. This works for any type of extension, be it declarative ones, but also Python extensions. So if I click that, it's going to build the extension package for me. And what is nice is that since this environment is integrated with my Dynatrace environment, it says, would you like to upload this extension to Dynatrace? And I'll say yes. Okay, so it's uploaded. Do you want to activate this version? Yes. And you can even have a link to open in Dynatrace directly. Okay. So it's going to open, we probably going to update this link to the new Dynatrace version, but it's going to go to the Dynatrace extensions page and open that extension that I just created. So it's a really quick process of having the extension from development to Dynatrace, especially if you're using the VS Code extension. The other command line as well is DT SDK build, DT SDK upload is only 2 commands, but this makes it more, easier for you to use, and you could immediately start configuring the extension. And this is what I mentioned before, where the extension can run both locally on the one agent or remotely on an ActiveGate. It comes by default with these 2 options. And the one agent has many options. You can specify specific hosts. You can use host groups, management zones, right? Or the entire environment. I don't have hosts on this environment.
And David, just out of curiosity, that means in the code itself, I get the information, do I run locally right now? Do I run remotely? And obviously for which environment, where do I really run? Like if I run on a one agent, I get all the information about where the one agent runs.
Yeah, so yeah, in the code, this class that you have here, it is aware if it's running on a one agent or ActiveGate. So we try to make extensions that they don't care where they are running, but sometimes you do care. So sometimes if you're running from the one agent, you may not ask the user for a URL because it's localhost, right? Yeah. So you can have different settings so that you get a different set of options from the user based on if they're on the ActiveGate or the remote one. And in the code, you can check for where you're running. The activation config has a remote or local option.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was my question. Yeah.
Okay, and this is the default screen that's going to create for you. So it's going to have a URL, username, and password. Okay. Of course, you don't necessarily need to use those parameters. And I'm going to show you how you can easily migrate extensions that already exist and already have parameters. Okay, this thing here on the right side is kind of important. This is how you would use the Dynatrace API to configure this extension. But also, this gives you the parameters that the user is configuring, right? So if I do some URL here, so this is going to automatically complete that. And I can use this value right here, specifically this value right here, when I'm simulating my extension. So if I go back to the extension, if you look at the activation.json file, this is that exactly same format. This is how, when I run the extension locally, what parameters should it use, right? Only during development, right? This doesn't go to Dynatrace, only used during development. And it's a quick way also to create this type of thing of, how do I get the values from? The VS Code extension can also automatically generate these based on your schema. So the extension is created. The next steps would be to actually assign, this has validation, meaning I have to put, something in these fields. This we did not have before. So I don't think this has a URL validation inbuilt in, but yeah. Right, so you would activate this extension, and this extension would then be assigned to an ActiveGate and run on that ActiveGate. Okay. There are some things here that have been done prior. So the ActiveGate already has my certificate that it trusts that it can run this extension. So that's the only step that you need to do prior in the actual host, have this certificate there. Dynatrace developed extensions. They are signed by a Dynatrace trusted certificate, but custom extensions, you have to provide a certificate to sign the extension. So it's going to run like any other extension. It's going to run on the Python data source and keep providing that metric that we saw before. Yeah, so that's pretty much it, how we create a first extension. Of course, there's documentation as well. Like I mentioned, Dynatrace Extensions SDK is on GitHub. So it's on our Dynatrace Extensions GitHub project, and it has documentation as well here on the GitHub pages. So it tells you how do you install, how do you run an extension, what are the possible commands, what's the structure of an extension. And it even has a section on how you migrate EF1 extensions to EF2. There's one thing that we should mention, so custom Python extensions, you'll be able to upload them to Dynatrace starting on Dynatrace 1.284. So that, any custom Python extension can be uploaded to Dynatrace. There's a feature where you can revocate a certificate, so that's what we are waiting for, to have that in Dynatrace. Which,
And David, just one more question from my side. So we have documentation, we got the Git repository with the SDK. Are there any extensions out there that you have built, or maybe the community has built, that people can have a peek at and look at to see what are people actually doing in the actual extension code? Like, how would you query data from, a system where the Python extension runs? I saw in your generated code, there's like already an example. It's commented out, but it's an example how to make a web request. But are there any examples as well where people can look into?
Yeah, so there are two places. One is the actual documentation. We are working on adding real examples. So we're going to have a full RabbitMQ extension in here that works both locally and remotely. But today, we can leverage the hub. So in the Dynatrace hub, if you filter by extension, remember, these are the ones that are Python, they're Python code. You can actually download these extensions and look at the Python code. So for instance, the endpoint NQ extension is a Python extension. I can download that extension here on the release notes, and it comes in a zip file.
Yeah.
And if you look at the zip file, it's the entire extension is here. You have the extension YAML, activation JSON, and in the lib, you have your actual Python package. It's also it's a wheel file, but a wheel file is really just a zip folder. I can just open that and look at the code for that extension.
Yeah, that was exactly my question. I mean, this is perfect, right? I guess I assume I currently show that my active Python coding has been it's been a while, so I don't know all the details, but this is great. So you can download pretty much every extension out there on the Dynatrace hub, and it's all zip files. You can go in and you can go all the way down to the code, because it's always great to learn from others and what people have done. So it's perfect. Thank you.
Yeah, and at the end of this, I have a list of interesting Python extensions from the hub that you can explore.
Perfect.
Okay, so now we've talked about creating a new Python extension and even building and uploading to Dynatrace. Let's talk a little bit about migrating. Okay, so the EF1 framework is is being deprecated later this year. So we want to help customers and everyone really to easily migrate the extension. So to migrate an extension, there are pretty much two steps. One is we convert the metadata. What is the metadata? The metadata is the parameters you ask the user, the extension version, right? Anything that goes in the plugin.json now goes into the extension.yaml file. And most of this is done automatically via VS Code, which is really helpful, especially for the parameters. We convert the code. So the code structure, like I mentioned before, it's quite similar. And we are adding to the VS Code as well some things that will automatically migrate some of the code. We cannot do everything on the code, but we can help you get started by automatically migrating several portions of the code. And then the screens, the topology, making the extension look nice, that is optional, right? That's something you can add later, but it is very nice to have, right? The unified analysis screens and the relationship between the different entities that your extension might have. So I just put this line here to showcase, this is a real V1 extension, the RabbitMQ extension, and how it looks like on V2, just to showcase that it really is similar, right? You still have the class, we just changed the base class that we extend. We still have the initialize method. We still have the query method. Okay, of course, there are more features in EF2, like you can schedule custom methods to run at custom specific times that you want. But you can still just use the query method just for a quick migration, okay? So you still get configuration the same way. The main difference here is that we actually remove code. We don't need to create groups and custom devices anymore. We immediately report metrics to Dynatrace. The actual entities where these metrics go to, these are declared in the extension.yaml file. These are topology, and these are the same for all extensions, for JMX, WMI, SNMP, Python. You can also have metadata. It's not part of the data collection. It's really separated, which makes a lot of sense, like separating the data collection from the Dynatrace topology logic.
And I think this is, again, thanks for highlighting this, because this is one of the key benefits of having the separation between collecting data and then connecting it, right? Because you collect data and then you collect data with metadata. And then as we are ingesting the data, we look at the metadata and then we assign it and connect it with the right entities. And folks, if you want to learn more about this, this has also been covered in some of the previous clinics. I think the one that we had on Extensions 2.0, we talked a lot about how you can use the metadata to tell Dynatrace about the actual entity model behind the scenes and where it should be connected to. So it's awesome. Yeah, thank you so much for that.
Awesome. And I also put a little table here. This table is also on our documentation, just to showcase, what you need to change from EF1 to EF2. So you can see most things will remain the same. And we have, of course, we covered everything that you could do in F1. You are able to do in F2 and more. Okay, and I just wanted to give a quick demo about how to convert a Python extension, just to showcase some cool new feature we have in VS Code add-on as well. So let's say I have an existing extension, right? I have an extension. It could be in Dynatrace, or I have the extension files in my machine. Doesn't matter, but I want to convert that to 2.0. So I can first I would create an empty 2.0 extension, like this one, a base extension. And then we have this command here, Dynatrace extensions convert Python. Quite powerful command. When you click that, it says, hey, do you want to convert a local extension that you have on your machine? It could be the extension zip file or the plugin.json file. Or do you want to browse Dynatrace for extensions that you have already in your Dynatrace environment? So you can choose any one of those. Let's do remotely. I have a bunch of extensions in Dynatrace. So you can see, like, I have a bunch of extensions, v1 extensions deployed to Dynatrace, and I'm saying, hey, I want to convert one of them to the new framework. So let's choose the RabbitMQ extension. Let's use the RabbitMQ extension. So what this does, it automatically updated the activation schema file for me with the data from that extension. Okay, so it changed, instead of asking the user for a URL, username, and password, I was going to ask for a RabbitMQ node, a RabbitMQ user, RabbitMQ password, keys to include. It automatically generates that thing for me so that I don't have to worry about doing that part of the code. If I build, so the code itself is not migrated yet. We would have to move the code from that extension to here. And we are writing, by the way, a hot session on how to do that. It's actually a part of Perform, and then later we're going to have sessions telling you step by step how to convert the code. But it's really easy because we still have the query method. You just remove some code. But anyways, I just wanted to show that, if I try to build the extension now, so it's automatically going to increase the version for me. This is done by VS Code. There's one thing that I need to change. So it says, hey, I cannot find Python local because this extension that I imported is a remote extension. So the framework here already know that's a remote extension, doesn't work on one agents, the v1 one. So it only added the remote one. But this is really easy to fix. We just remove the local from the extension.yaml file. Now I'm going to build. And it's nice that VS Code gives me the error right here. Yeah, upload to Dynatrace and activate. Now in Dynatrace, if I look for my extension, so that is called my first extension. You know, if I try to create a new monitor configuration now, look, this changed. Now it's asking for RabbitMQ stuff, right? RabbitMQ node, RabbitMQ user, RabbitMQ password. So this automatically migrated for you, so you don't have to worry about how to write the schema for the settings 2.0. And then it's only the code migration that is done. Like I mentioned, there's a guide here, Migrating EF1 Extensions. It goes step by step, showing you which commands you need to run and how you copy the code and what things you need to move. And we've already converted over 100, we created over 130 Python extensions with the new framework. And the ones that we converted are on the hub as well.
So you can definitely say that this conversion feature has been battle tested with more than 100 plugins
Yes,
that
for
we
sure.
converted. Awesome, man.
Yeah, we make heavy use of that. All right, and then I wanted to give you guys some resources, the documentation, the VS Code observability clinic that we talked about, but it's also, there's going to be some links in the description, like Andy said. And this part here, which are some Python extensions that are already on the hub. There are many more, but these are the ones that have, like, I think I consider some interesting code, where if you need to do something more advanced in your extension, these have examples of everything you could possibly need to do in Python extensions. So, you know, like we said, just download the zip and you have the code right there. It's Python code. It's open code. You can copy the code. It's, you know, it's not like Dynatrace has some licensing of the code or anything like that. We really want to make this as open as possible.
Cool. Hey, David, to just recap, if I am a Dynatrace user and I want to bring in additional data into Dynatrace, if it's SNMP, WMI, if it is Prometheus, then we can use a declarative way using the extension tool framework. However, if I have systems where I need some code, some Python code, for instance, I need to make a call to an HTTP endpoint and then convert the data. If I need to fetch something from, let's say, a local machine, or if I run on an ActiveGate, or if I run on a one agent and I need some Python script to actually convert the data and then provide it to Dynatrace, I can do this now very easily with the extension framework 2.0. The Visual Studio extension that we have, the Visual Studio Code extension, makes it super easy to get started because you took all the boilerplating work away from me. You can also easily convert extension framework 1 plugins into EF2. And then the other thing is, as you just have the hub open again, you can easily look at extensions that are already out there to also get a feeling on what type of extensions have people built. Why do I even need to build extensions? And you can then even, you know, see the code that was written to query things like Anypoint, Apache MQ, Kafka, Cassandra, Active Directory, Apigee. I'm just reading off the list here. So really, really, really awesome. David, any other final words? I know we have a lot of links and additional resources. Anything else you wanted to make sure people know?
No, that's perfect, the way you summarized it. And we always say, you know, try to use the declarative ones first. If it's not possible, you do need Python code, then move to Python, because of course it's way easier for you to maintain just a YAML file with declaring what you want to monitor instead of writing code. But yeah, like you said, plenty of examples here and really well written extensions for the different technologies.
And also, I can just encourage folks, if you have an idea for an extension, or if you are, let's say, you have a system that you want to better monitor with Dynatrace, the first thing that I would do, go to the hub and see if an extension might already be out there. You can also go to the community.dynatrace.com, right, and ask around and see if anybody is also working on an extension already. So maybe join forces. Maybe David's team is already building something or has something in the works. And if not, it's super easy, as you've seen today, to build your own extension. Awesome. Good. Well, with this, David, I know you said Perform is coming up hot day. We will publish this video just before Perform. In case you watch this after Perform, also watch out for any sessions that we're doing on Dynatrace University. I'm pretty sure the hot sessions, the hands-on training sessions, will also be delivered in other regions, in other cities, at other times in the future. Yeah, stay tuned.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.